Trap squad, 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 trap squad. Hey, clickbaity political. Yeah, thirst trap, trap squad, squirrel squad. Our mission is critical to speak the truth to the masses. Yeah. We here for the fight. We ain't started, but we here to finish it. Sick and tired of seeing the privilege. Take advantage of the weak and the innocent. So we let our voice be heard. Every single weeknight. Unapologetic. Yeah. Black people, despite this white supremacist system that we live through on a daily, we still throwing up those acorns cause we represent clickbaity. Yeah. Trap squad, trap squad, trap squad, let me hear ya. Trap squad, trap squad, throw those squirrels up if you with it. Trap squad, trap squad, yeah I see you, yeah I see you. Trap squad, trap squad, trap squad, ThirstTrap, trap squad, trap squad, trap squad, let me hear ya. Trap squad, trap squad, throw those squirrels up if you with it. Trap squad, trap squad, yeah I see you, yeah I see you. Trap squad, trap squad, trap squad, ThirstTrap.
Thank you, Jason. Dr. West, glad to have you on. Glad for you to join us. I remember in 2016, you and I were having a discussion about the death of my cousin, Jonathan Farrell, and you had some viewpoints about how things could possibly change. Since that conversation about about our resistance and the progressive resistance and Black resistance in general, I can't front to you, Doc. I've been a person who has started advocating for Black self-awareness and Black people taking advantage of the Second Amendment. And I'm very interested with all the things that are going on right now. How do you think we protect ourselves? How do you think guns are the answer? Do you think knowledge is the answer? What do you think? How do you think that we can go about protecting ourselves as African Americans in this country?
Well, again, I'm just blessed to be here. And it seems to me that anytime we wrestle with the kind of profound questions you all are raising, it's not just a matter of an isolated voice like mine trying to respond, or even isolated voice of any of us. I think we find so many of the insights and grand examples in our history. Black people, we are unique in the modern world of having to deal with such chronic and systemic care and trauma and stigma and hatred. And yet we dish out such freedom fighters, such healers, such love warriors. So I just want to begin briefly with Malcolm. Malcolm said what, 1965? I'm for truth no matter who tells it. I'm for justice, no matter who it is for or against. I'm a human being, first and foremost. And as such, I'm for whoever and whatever benefits humanity as a whole. Now, if you put truth and you put justice as the criteria, then the first thing you have to have is self-respect as a human being. We are living in a white civilization grounded in the American empire, linked to predatory capitalism and forms of patriarchy and homophobia and transphobia, which means then in any white supremacist civilization, Black love is a crime, Black freedom is a pipe dream, Black history is a curse, and Black hope is a joke. So white supremacy tries to convince us of all of those, and most importantly, and I've been teaching this for 44 years now, to keep us so afraid and scared and intimidated. So when Malcolm says, very much echoing Mary Ellen Pleasant, who was a Black sister, who was the godmother of human rights in California, first multimillionaire, because she married a white robber baron, he dropped dead, and she inherited millions and millions and millions of dollars, gave nearly $1 million to John Brown in the 1850s. She used to say, I'd rather be a corpse than a coward. That's Malcolm. I'd rather be a corpse than a coward. So we have to have a willingness to look the fear in the face and to respect ourselves, to determine ourselves, and yes, back to your question, brother, to defend ourselves. It's no revolutionary act to want to defend your mama, your brother, your sister, your child. If people are killing you, if people are coming at you, you must defend yourself if you are a human being who respects yourself. Now, that doesn't mean you go off an aggressive way. No, we don't have a tradition of responding to American terrorism, U.S. terrorism for 400 years by creating anti-terrorist organizations that aggressively attack people. Our whole freedom movement is an anti-terrorist movement. NAACP began by responding to the vicious attacks of Black people in Springfield, Illinois, as we know. We can go on and on about the kind of terror we've had to respond. So it's an anti-terrorist movement, but we don't have a tradition of having Black versions of the Ku Klux Klan at all. So yes, we must defend ourselves, but most importantly, we must have courage. That's what Malcolm says over and over again. He says we must have courage, we must be sincere, we must acknowledge when we're wrong, we must acknowledge we have no monopoly on truth, we must lift every voice and learn from each other, not lift every echo and just be an echo chamber for somebody else's views. We have to believe enough in ourselves and think critically enough for ourselves that we can defend, respect, and try to determine ourselves, our community, yes, our nation as radical Democrats, and of course the world, because Malcolm was an internationalist. Now, I'm not saying that Brother Malcolm has all of the answers, but I'm saying this, that as a Black people who've been on intimate terms with forms of catastrophe for over 400 years, whose very backs constitute the basis of the modern world of picking the cotton linked to the Lancashire mills that first industrialized the British nation and British Empire, that we got something to learn from the folk who came before, even as the circumstances and the conditions of the present day are in many ways different, but are in many ways the same. We got 244 years of white supremacist slavery. We had 12 years of multiracial democracy and Reconstruction and went under. We had neo-slavery for another 100 years. And now we've got a new form of Jim Crow, which is another form of slavery, but not for everybody. For the most part, it is not for the Black middle class. It's not for the Black bourgeoisie. It is for the Black poor and Black working people that the neo-slavery is still directly connected. There I do agree with Brother Mondale. But there has been a class shift that has taken place. And we have to be honest about that. The unbelievable struggle, blood, sweat, and tears of Black folk in the street, 250 rebellions within 8 years, over 175 one night when Brother Martin was shot. You see, that created unprecedented opportunity for the Black middle class. But yet that Black middle class has been unable to deliver. Why? Because it lives in a capitalist failure. The capitalist economy fails Black people. The nation state fails Black people to protect. The culture fails Black people. Corporate media fails Black people. And I would say poor people too. So we deal with these forms of failure, and we have to have people like Malcolm and Fannie Lou and so many others of the recent past, and going all the way back to Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman and company, who would love the people enough to tell them the truth, who respect the people enough to be sincere, and then to acknowledge, lo and behold, yes, we're losing at the moment, but we're still swinging. I know I'm going on too long here, though, brother.
No, that's great. That's great, Dr. West.
But I want to just set the context, because on Malcolm's day, we're talking about a great people with a grand tradition of truth-telling and justice-seeking that is in many ways unprecedented. We've got a whole host of wonderful traditions of other people, but nobody in the midst of the grandest empire the world has ever seen in terms of military might and economic might has there been in the midst of such an empire of people like Black people, an empire that understands itself as the beacon of liberty, as the exemplar of freedom, and yet here enslaved, Jim Crow, Jane Crow, hated, haunted people raising up a bloodstained banner in the name of truth, in the name of justice. That's Malcolm.
Thank you, Dr. West. You can't see us, but we're over here all nodding in agreement, and I'm pretty sure everybody who's watching us right now is nodding in agreement. You're getting a lot of likes and a lot of love on here. So, you know, I've heard you speak on because you bring up progressivism. And I've heard you speak recently about fascism versus neoliberalism versus progressivism, and what these things mean. So I would like for you, if you could, take a moment, because it seems like some of the people on here only know you because of Bernie Sanders' world, right? They don't know the work that you've done beforehand. Some of you only know you because you've delivered dynamic speeches for a candidate, right? Not realizing. And also,
I got Race Matters right behind me.
I said some
album.
about his rap album. Some, not y'all. Some. Now back to Dr. West. So, with that being said, I got a twofold question for you, and I'll let you just release on it. What is fascism, neoliberalism, and progressivism to you? And when it comes down to Black progressivism, also, if you want to add that caveat. And lastly, people think the progressive movement started with Bernie, and we know that to be not true. We know that progressive movement and Black progressivism has been going on for a very long time. So would you mind explaining what the progressive movement was in the past, and also what you think and where you think it's going to be going in the future?
No, well, thank you. Well, let me just first say, though, that one of the greatest honors I have, other than being the second son of Cliff and Irene West, and coming out of Shiloh Baptist Church, Reverend Willie P. Cook, is finishing a record just yesterday with a genius named Bootsy Collins. He's got a record coming out called The Power of the One. Got another one dealing with this present virus. So that for people who think that I'm only with Bernie Sanders, I just want to say I love working with Bootsy in a fundamental way. And if you go back to my third album, working with Prince and Gerald Levert and Andre 3000 and Jill Scott and Rod Digger and Talib Kweli, those are the high moments for me. On stage with Shirley Caesar and Tremaine Hawkins, those are the high moments for me. But I'll say this, that when it comes to politics, you got to bring a certain spirit to it. You got to bring a certain humor to it. You see, you got to wear all these politicians like a loose garment, because you're there not in the name of a campaign, not in the name even of an ism, because you're there because you're trying to the best of your fallible ability to love the people and respect the people and serve the people in such a way that every gift that you have, every form of weaponry that's available to you is used and deployed on their behalf. You're in America, but not of it. Just as a revolutionary Christian, I'm in the world, but not of it. And so when it comes to looking at these different isms, the question is always going to be, does it meet the fundamental moral and spiritual criteria of being truthful about the depth and scope of our suffering and being truthful about the depth and scope of our resilience and our resistance? So let's look at fascism. That Donald Trump is a neo-fascist gangster in a White House built by Black people. What is a neo-fascist? A neo-fascist is someone who rules in the name of big military, the militarism that Brother Martin was talking about, the 53 cents for every dollar that passes through the U.S. budget that goes to the military-industrial complex, that drops drones on innocent people, including innocent children around the world, that has over 4,800 military units around the world, 800 of them being outside of the United States, that attacks Venezuela, that expands AFRICOM in Africa, that continues to drop bombs and drones in the Middle East as well as Asia, be it U.S. lent and supported Saudi bombs in Yemen, you see, or be it U.S. supported Israeli bombs in Gaza or the West Bank. That's the militarism Brother Martin Luther King was talking about. But that's tied to big military and then big money, which is Wall Street. We live in a financialized capitalist society. 40 years ago, it was industrialized. 40 years ago, it was American Motors that was a major corporate entity. They made things. Now it's Wall Street. They make deals. It's a very different kind of configuration of profit maximization. So it's more tied to banks and financial services now. So that when we're talking about fascism, you're talking about the rule of big military and big money, and then have a so-called strong man who will always have weapons of distraction that will keep the people's attention away from what's really going on and will highlight scapegoats. They could be Mexicans, they could be Muslims, they could be black people, they can be indigenous people, they could be women, they could be gays, they could be lesbian, they could be trans. All of the different candidates that gangster Trump uses to scapegoat the most vulnerable so that we cannot come together and confront the most powerful. Now, neoliberalism, which has been in place for a significant amount of time now, going back to Carter, you get a neoconservative move toward Reagan, and then back through, especially by Clinton and Obama, and now Biden. Neoliberal is, in fact, more humane domestically, not so much internationally. It's more humane domestically than neo-fascism because it allows for some concessions, not too many, but some concessions. So the rule of big military still goes on. You look at each of the administrations of Democratic presidents, from Clinton to Obama, you still had military expansion.
Right.
You still had bombs. I mean, Brother Barack, God bless him, he dropped 563 drones, killing thousands of people and hundreds of children and so forth. Very little talk about it. Some of us did in the name of Martin Luther King's critique of militarism. But the same is true on the Clintons. The same would be true on the Biden, even though I think Biden is better than the gangster. And we'll get into that. But also that same neoliberal rule deregulates, marketizes, privatizes everything it gets its hands through education. It privatizes for what? For profit maximization too. It is much more liberal on social issues when it comes to precious gay brothers and lesbian sisters and trans. It allows for them to gain access to a mainstream with their rights and liberties. Those are still very important. I don't want to downplay those at all. And they make room for black middle class folks. They allow for inclusion of a black bourgeoisie within their class hierarchy, within their imperial hierarchy, but they want symbolic representation within the system without any serious talk about a transformation of the system, which means that those who are still left out, which is roughly now, Brother William Barber lays this thing out so beautifully in his Poor People's Campaign with Sister Liz Theo Harris. He lays it out. You got 40% of Americans living in the richest empire in the history of the world who are near poverty or in poverty. Well, see, that's a failure of a system.
Right.
That's capitalist failure. I mean, people like to talk about communist failures. Oh, we got a whole lot of communist failure now in the Soviet Union and so forth and so on. They don't want to talk about capitalist failure. Well, if you love the people, you love Russian poor people, you say communist failure is communist failure. If you're loving poor people and loving black people in America, the American capitalist failure is a failure.
Dr.
So you
West,
get
I have a question.
neoliberal rule as the second. So what we have right now is you got a neo-fascist wing of the ruling class, this Trump and company, and a cowardly, callous, disgusting Republican Party that succumbs and collaborates and goes hand in hand with all of his lies. Then you got a neoliberal wing of the Democratic Party, which is still part of the ruling class, that try to provide some concessions for the masses of folk who are suffering more and more from wage stagnation, decrepit housing, decrepit school systems, not enough access to health care and so forth. And there are some places for black folk within that neoliberal project. And black folk are there because of the struggles of black, poor, working class, and black middle class folk in the 60s. But then there's the progressive neo-populism of Brother Bernie, which is still tied to the Democratic Party. It's over against the establishment of the Democratic Party, and he's trying to get some kind of more substantial concessions. So he wants Medicare for all. Hey, this ain't communism. The military has it. Congress has it. How come the masses can't have it? You see? He wants critiques of Wall Street in such a way that their greed is regulated, in such a way that when they commit crimes of insider trading and market manipulation and predatory lending, not one of them go to jail, and yet let Jamal or Letitia get caught with some drugs, they go straight to jail. Well, you can see how criminal the criminal justice system is.
Indeed.
So
Dr.
we got
West,
Wall Street.
Dr. West, if I may, Dr. West,
Yes,
thank you.
yes.
No problem. I mean, to be honest with you, because we have a couple more questions for you. So I'm gonna ask you one more question, and then I'm gonna let Mondale and Jason jump in here and sort of continue the question, a couple of questions in the conversation. For those of us who believe in the atypical political process of a primary election and a general election, it seems right now that there's only two options. And it seems like those options are Joe Biden and Donald Trump. And I want to give you an opportunity to just briefly explain your thought process on whether vote blue no matter who is a thing for us right now to stop neo-fascism, or is neoliberalism the way to go with Joe Biden?
Oh, you're talking about just voting, though, right?
Just voting.
Oh, yeah, no, in terms of just voting, I mean, that's just a moment where you got to have a little cognac to go in and close your eyes and close your nose and hold your breath and vote for a mediocre, milquetoast neoliberal. No, there's no doubt about that. You have to get the fascists out. I view myself as part of an anti-fascist coalition. And so you got to get rid of the neo-fascists from the White House. There's no doubt about that. But there's never just two options. There's always the people's option, and then the options that power elites and ruling class present to the people. So the third option, the people's option, is tell the truth about who Trump, not just Trump as an isolated individual. It's not a matter of extricating him and going back to business as usual. Business as usual, black folks still catching hell. Poor people, working people still catching hell. That the people's option is tell the truth about the neo-fascism of Trump. Don't be surprised when the corporate media trots out the examples over and over again. Just get more fortified. Get more ready for battle, to be already organized. The second truth is to tell the truth about Biden. Don't lie about Biden. You know, when I heard my dear sister Kamala Harris come out talking about how Biden has worked for the downtrodden, or I think his brother, my dear brother Michael Eric Dyson, told me he's been an advocate for the downtrodden. I love both of them. Brother Dyson, a rhetorical genius, but that brother is deploying his genius in a way that reflects his adjustment to the status quo, what I view as a sellout. I said, no, tell the truth, Brother Biden. Brother Dyson, tell the truth, Sister Harris. He's better than Trump. No doubt. Don't lie and say the architect of the largest prison system in the history of the modern world, targeting black young people, means he's an advocate for the downtrodden. Don't say somebody who brags about supporting invasion and occupation of Iraq, where over 500,000 people have been killed, precious Iraqis, that somehow he's fighting for the downtrodden, or opening up the Wall Street greed by repealing Glass-Steagall. We can go on and on and on about Biden. So you tell the truth about Biden and explain to the people that the people's choice goes beyond just voting. You got to be organized. You got to participate. You know, Brother Stokely Carmichael used to say, observation is for those who are willing to engage in participation. So you don't want to be a spectator and sitting back looking at corporate media, see everybody catching hell and feeling more and more cynical and despondent. No, you got to be connecting your observation, your vision, your analysis to fortifying your soul and body to be in motion, organized, mobilized. I mean, the kind of thing Brother Mondale does all the time in terms of dealing with these different projects with the brothers and things. Involved, and there's so many different ways of being involved. There's a variety of different ways of being involved. And no ideology, no church, no mosque, no synagogue, no organization has a monopoly on that. You got a lot of decent folk in the NAACP who are doing wonderful things, even if they got neoliberal black leadership that I have an indictment for. You got a lot of good folk in the mosques, in the synagogues, in the churches, and so forth, even though much of their leadership sells out to Biden. As much as I love Brother Clyburn, he just lost his precious wife. And I'm a Christian. I love that brother. I pray for him. But I know that he's the major recipient of big farm money. So he's not going to be obsessed with Medicare for all. So when he comes out for Biden, the press don't want to tell that story. They don't want to tell the truth of that particular aspect of that brother. Now, when it comes to him fighting against white supremacy in other ways, he and I are allies. But when it comes to critiques of corporations, when it comes to critiques of big pharmacy, when it comes to critiques of Wall Street, he is on the other side. He's on the other class divide. Like most of the neoliberal leadership in the Democratic Party, that's how they came together to crush Bernie.
Hey, Dr. West, can I cut in? Can I cut in real quick?
Oh, absolutely.
So before the end of this show, and you don't have to answer this right now, but I need to know your top 5 hip hop artists of all time. But we're not gonna go there right now.
Rakim. Oh no, okay.
Dylan.
I'm gonna bring in
Bakari tell you his wonderful book, Sweat the Technique, Brother Bakari and Rakim. We did a wonderful session here just a couple of months ago at Harvard. Go right ahead though.
Yeah, so I'm going to bring in Dr. Johnson, Dr. Jason Johnson, and for your first question, and then we're going to bring in Mondale. So, Jason, what's up, man?
So, Dr. West, first off, it's an honor, it's a privilege. I probably lack the eloquence to do all the compliments that you're used to hearing, so I'm just going to try and jump to my question.
No, you jump, my brother. Thank you so much. God bless your family, and hope they're safe and strong, my brother.
Thank you very much. You were a surrogate in the Obama campaign in 2008. Obama wins. You were a surrogate for Senator Sanders in 2016. You lost to Hillary Clinton. There were some questionable things about how the Democratic Party handled that. I think anyone honest has to say that the amount of money and investment that the Clintons had in the Democratic Party may have not made that the fairest process possible.
That's true. I think you're right about that.
And then, you were also an advocate, a surrogate, and probably an even more intimate part of the 2020 Sanders campaign. From your perspective, what do you think happened in 2020? Because as a political analyst, as a political scientist, Bernie Sanders came into 2020 with like a mile lead, right? He had the biggest, he had greater access to money. He had 100% name recognition. He had a brand that had stayed clean throughout the first 3 years of the Trump administration. And yet he still lost to Biden, who, again, I think objectively speaking, is a weaker candidate than Hillary Clinton was in 2016. So what do you think happened? What do you think, was it a corporate failure? Was it a strategic failure? Why do you think Bernie Sanders failed to get the nomination in 2020?
Yeah, it's a wonderful question, though, brother. I think there's a number of reasons. And you can imagine we could have a seminar in your class at Morgan State University wrestling with that query. But one was that not just Bernie, but the people behind Bernie, the Bernie Sanders movement that Marcus was so much a part of there in 2012, that it helped reshape the climate of opinion. He was a thermostat rather than a thermometer. So he shaped the climate of opinion, didn't just reflect it. And by shaping the climate of opinion, it did come back at him because you had so many others who were saying similar things that he had said in 2012.
Right.
You got Sister Elizabeth Warren out there now. Even you got Sister Kamala Harris was tilting in that direction for a little while, you see? And even Brother Corey. God bless Brother Corey. I've known him for 25 years. I have a deep love of him, and we know we've got our disagreements and things. He had Corey saying some of the things he was saying. So on Medicare, on education, on jobs, that he was winning the ideological battle. He was reshaping the very context of the conversation. And by doing that, many people began to raise the question, well, he's got the right message. Is he the right messenger? that it looked like these other folk are picking up on his points.
Right.
And they might be able to take them in different directions with a different style and so forth and so on. And then, of course, he's always had the independent status. But I think the other reason I would stress, though, and here's my critique of the black bourgeoisie, the black political class, the black professional class, and it echoes that of the great Brother Adolph Reed Jr. and Torrey now, too. Torrey Reed, his brilliant son, historians just come out with a new book toward freedom, that the black vote and the black woman's vote is just so fundamental for the Democratic Party.
Right.
And it's clear that our precious black sisters never really get any kind of payoff for the fundamental role that they play.
Mm-hmm.
But the black community at its leadership level was so willing to stay in the neoliberal zone, which was the Biden zone.
Okay.
And it was a Biden zone partly because he had Barack Obama's halo over him. Because it was our dear brother Barack Obama who chose Biden.
Right.
He was the one who brought in the person who's got the alliance with Jesse Helms and with Strom Thurmond and the segregation. It comes to education and the link to Wall Street, the things that I talked about, you see. And so it was very difficult for us, Sister Nina Turner, love her so, and many other black folk, Danny Glover, to convince the masses of black voters that they ought to take a chance and step outside of the neoliberal zone of Biden in the way that they had supported the neoliberal zone of Hillary. You remember black folk? We couldn't convince black folks to support Bernie in 2012 either.
Nope.
No, not at all, because it was a safe zone. Now it's understandable because the desperation and the pain and the hurt coming at black folks is so overwhelming that they looked at me and said, Brother West, we don't have time to experiment with all this democratic socialism stuff, brother.
Yeah. I mean, I got to ask you, because
and I can understand that, but it's backfired on us in many ways, though. You see, because if we end up with such a weak milquetoast candidate and Trump wins again, oh Lord, I mean, we might not be able to have this dialogue in 2 or 3 years. The neo-fascism take over. We all going to jail.
Right.
And I'll tell you, I'd rather get shot than go to jail. I'll tell you that right now.
Jason, you got to follow up, or let me jump in?
No, I'm going to give you time, Monday. I'm a process, and then I'll come back.
Dr. West, I got a couple questions. The first one is about us being black nerds, and I want to talk about something that happened or something that was said almost 200 years ago. And then the next one is a light question. So just let our viewers know what you think about as a foreshadowing point, what Søren Kierkegaard, a Danish philosopher that I know you follow and is a scholar of, when he was critical of Christianity being a Danish state religion compared to where we find ourselves between his now, which was almost 200 years, from our now, which is right now, where we don't have Christianity being a state religion, but Trumpism, and people taking his word as the gospel. How do you see that as irony and also death to this nation and democracy?
Appreciate the question, though. But again, we can go back to Malcolm. You know, what Malcolm talked about a niggerized Christianity.
Yes.
Niggerized Christianity that had Jesus looking like Michelangelo's uncle on the wall. They never had a picture of Jesus running out the money changers out of the temple. They only had a Jesus who looked so meek and so weak that he was not fortified, fighting in the name of the love of the least of these and concerned about justice of those who were catching hell. And there's a long history going all the way back to Constantine. We know the early Christians were persecuted, put in the lion's den and so forth, just like the first black Christians in America, so-called land of religious liberty, were never allowed to worship without white supervision, were never allowed to learn how to read or write, and were persecuted, were hanged, were exterminated, if in fact they really acted on the gospel. Because when you really love folk, then you fight for them. So if you love enslaved Africans and you fight for them, you're going down like Nat Turner. You're going down like Harriet Tubman. so that we got a long history of Christianity being accommodating to empires and forms of evil and structures of domination. But niggerized Christianity is a form of Christianity in which you teach black people they ought to be afraid and scared of white supremacy, and therefore they ought to have a conception of the gospel that renders them deferential to white power. So they laugh when it ain't funny and scratch when it don't itch, and always refuse to be honest and candid about what their situation really is in the name of Jesus. And this is Brother Martin. Brother Martin went to Detroit. It was just a recent fathers, Reverend C.L. Franklin's church and Hartford Memorial Church and 2 or 3 others that even allowed their pulpit to be open to him, because most of the other pastors were bought off by Henry Ford. Right. In the Ford production units. You see what I mean? So there's a long history of this. These days, we don't have that many. It's not a mass movement of black church folk in Trump's corner. It might be increasing, but it's going to be very small. But what we don't have enough black churches who have a prison ministry much larger than their building fund.
Wow.
That don't have a prison ministry much larger than the discretionary money spent by the minister, sometimes just on his car, some of them on airplanes. So you end up with the commodification of Christianity. You end up with a prosperity gospel even when the prosperity drops out. So the blood at the cross becomes Kool-Aid. And once you get Kool-Aid at the bottom of the cross, people just want to dip in order to get something rather than to get in it and get transformed in order to fight for something.
Come on now. Okay, that's service right there. I want to say, you and I shared space a couple times, and we had wonderful conversations. I'm always learning every time I talk to you. One of the best times that I learned from you was not in your presence, though. It was actually listening to Never Forget a Journey of Revelation, which is your rap album that came on the heel of 9/11, and in a time where this country was so distraught. And like you said on that album, the first time white people were niggerized. I want you to tell me how you were able to get so many artists on that album, and also sow black love throughout that album, and then speak to the radical nature of black men loving black men.
No, indeed. Well, really, I began talking about the genius Bootsy, the great funk master. I'd say the same thing about George Clinton. They all showed up at my retirement at Princeton over 8 years ago, because they know that I am first and foremost a revolutionary Christian who's grounded in the black musical tradition. See, the black musical tradition is the greatest tradition in the modern world of moral courage and spiritual fortitude. Wow. So the black musicians, in many ways, they set the standard. You remember in the middle of Malcolm's autobiography when he talks about Duke Ellington bowing to him when he and Laura are dancing so soulfully on the floor, and he'd never ever forget it. Well, see, Duke is spiritual nobility. He's artistic royalty, and our nobility and royalty, for the most part, has been musicians, because they're the ones who respect themselves. They're the ones who love themselves. They're the ones who can look at themselves and their music not through the white normative gaze. This ain't no Du Boisian double consciousness where you look at yourself through the lens of somebody else. Yes. Coltrane doesn't give a damn what Downbeat magazine says if they believe that Chet Baker or they believe that Benny Goodman is the greatest so-and-so. They don't mean nothing to them. They want to know what Charlie Parker thinks. They want to know what Sonny Rollins thinks. We got our own standards. We got our own points of reference. We got our own highest standards. That's what Malcolm's our standard. We don't give a goddamn what JFK thinks. Malcolm is our standard in that sense. You see what I mean? Well, you see, the musicians do understand those persons who use them as paradigms, as standards in that way. And so when Michael Daly came up with the idea and connected with my brother Cliff West, and I'll never be 1/3 of the human being he is, he's still going strong at 69, the three of us formed Black Men Who Mean Business. And all we did was we just sat down and we called Prince, and Prince said, oh, you know, I don't allow my music to be connected in any way with hip hop because I'm Jehovah's Witness now. And I think that hip hop, for the most part, is not doing what it ought to do in order to serve our struggle. But Brother West, I will make an exception for you. Well, you see, for me, that's the highest compliment. You know what I mean? I don't give a goddamn what any other compliment is.
Right.
I know that Curtis Mayfield never won a Grammy, but Milli Vanilli won too.
Right.
So it don't make no difference. You know what I mean? It's like our dear sister just won the Pulitzer Prize the other day, right? Ida B. Wells. And that's a beautiful thing, but she's too deep for a Pulitzer Prize.
Right.
Pulitzer Prize can never offer us what she means to us in the depths of our being. You see what I mean? So we ain't after these prizes and so forth. We got our own standards. Not because we're separatists. We understand the genius of a Shakespeare and a Beethoven and so forth, but we understand excellence at its highest level, especially as it connects to empowering us in the midst of these catastrophes coming at us, where they were trying to wipe us out. And they've yet to wipe us out. We still here, as Benjamin Mays told me when I met him in 1977. We still here swinging. And so in that sense, the musicians open themselves. We had a whole host of musicians. Now, what was interesting was when we went to the oligarchs and the plutocrats in the recording industry and tried to get some of their artists, they came out swinging. So, we had some fights with Clive Davis and them. Oh, this political crap, Professor West. You're just trying to debase the tradition. I said, please. Those are the battles that take place. Why? Because they want to dumb the music down. They want G-string only. They want to make sure that all of that rich genius, talent, intelligence, the young black folk are not exposed to the greatness that has been at work in their tradition. They just want to make money, just like Wall Street. And that's a spiritual war against young black folk. Now, when it comes to black men, how do we learn how to love each other? Well, all you got to do is look at the relation of Miles Davis and John Coltrane.
Man.
Miles got his own quartet. He plays 3 minutes, and Train plays 18 minutes every night. And people say, Miles, Coltrane is trying to take over. He's trying to get center stage. How come you give him that much time? It just takes him that long to say what he got to say.
That's right.
And it takes me this long to say what I got to say. Go on, Train, and play what you got to do. Well, you see, that's a love. That's a trust. This ain't competition. This is empowerment. He's got a security. He's got a confidence in himself. He knows Train is not trying to take over his quartet. Train was working some stuff out. Miles had done the same thing when he was with Dizzy Gillespie.
Hey, Dr. West, you sound like Jason Johnson talking to me and Mondale about this show right now. Mondale has one more question for you.
Oh, yeah.
You know, Dr. West, I just want you to continue. My question is just continue talking about black men love, because people think it's a thing that happens in the magical sphere on Disney movies when black men are made by CG. So I just want you to tell them the truth. So keep going, brother.
Oh, well, I gave you a good example. We just had a discussion 2 nights ago for 3.5 hours with Black Morehouse brothers and Eddie Glaude and Mark Jefferson and the 2 Chucks and things, wrestling with literature. And we having a good time. We have a good time intellectually, spiritually, socially. Why? Because we can be ourselves. We can be open enough. We can be vulnerable enough. We can be volatile enough to dig into the depth of our humanity and our own intelligence and cultivated education and so forth. And those are the moments of tremendous empowerment, unbelievable enhancement. But it's all connected. It's not compartmentalized. It's not just intellectual, even though it's rigorous. It's not just spiritual, because you got a whole lot of intellectual stuff going on. It's not just social, but it is bonding all together. Now, it's no accident that in this neo-fascist moment and neoliberal moment just before, that when you look at the history of black music, you don't see any black male groups who sing together with a sweetness and a intensity like the Delphonics or the Dramatics or the Mighty Dells or Main Ingredient or the Whispers or Enchantment. I can go on and on and on and on. I grew up with examples of Black brothers who stepped on the stage that allowed each other to go higher precisely because they were there together. They were there together. It was a collective performance. Boys to Men is about the last group I know. You see?
So,
now that's not an accident. You see, because that kind of openness, David Russin's intimacy and delicacy and his kenosis, his emptying of himself in such a powerful manner, touching the other souls of other folks with his Black brothers right beside him. Take it over, Eddie Kendricks. Take it over, Otis. Take it over.
So, Dr. West, because I'm the one who always ends up having to hop out early. I want to ask this question. It's going to be burning in my heart, and it's a perfect jump off from what you just said. So you said, hey, look, beautiful music, like all sorts of art, like politics, like movements, is a collective effort. The
Absolutely.
question on the tips of everybody's tongue right now is that who's going to be part of Joe Biden's collective effort? Now we have a group of sisters right now who, because we're assuming it's going to be somebody Black, but there are a group of people right now, whether it's highly likely people like Senator Harris or Warren or Klobuchar, or less likely people like Sister Turner or Stacey Abrams or Susan Rice. From your perspective, given that they've got to make beautiful music together, and we want to get the neo-fascists out of the White House, who do you think Joe Biden should pick to be a part of his band for 2020?
Ooh, well, part of the problem is he's head of the band, so it ain't gonna be James Brown's band. but if he's the chooser, then you say, my hunch is that it's a choice between Sister Amy or Sister Kamala. Mm-hmm. And I say that only because we know Stacey's brilliant and she's sharp and so forth, but people will go at her in terms of not having enough experience at a state level or a national level. She can certainly handle it and do a wonderful job, but I think he probably would pull back on that.
Right.
I don't see him going for. I think my dear brother Clyburn's been talking about the mayor of Atlanta, but I think that's way out in
right.
terms of a possibility. But my hunch is Sister Amy or Sister Kamala, and then the question would be, will they be able to generate enough excitement and enthusiasm to bring people out?
And that's a real question, because even if it's not an issue of bringing people out, it's an issue of, are you exciting enough that I'm going to want to fill in my mail-in ballot and actually put it in my mailbox when I have been out of work for 3.5 months, when I'm still suffering from coronavirus?
That's exactly right. Very much so. But you can see, again, as Black folk, that we've got our backs against the wall, and it's always there against the wall, because the choice between a neoliberal disaster and a neo-fascist catastrophe means that you go with a neoliberal disaster, no doubt, but don't call that disaster some kind of major triumph for poor people or working people.
Right.
That Brother Biden is not a friend of poor people. He's not a friend of working people. And he has not historically been a friend of Black people, even though after Obama, with the rebranding and the refashioning, and him invoking Obama's name over and over again, he's got that symbolic connection. Now, there's always the unpredictable element, and I'm open to this. LBJ was an outright white supremacist. Who would have thought he would be a force for good and fighting against white supremacy? If Biden gets in, and he has the presidency by committee, and he's got the right folk on the committee, then some of what I'm saying could be called into question. He could actually follow through on something substantive. Now, already we hear about bringing in Larry Summers. Oh, my God, brother Larry Summers again?
Mm-hmm.
Recycling the same old trite neoliberal policies tied to Wall Street, militarism, the same thing I've talked about before. You would have thought that they would have learned that lesson from Clinton, but Obama brought him right in and made him head
Exactly.
of the Council of Economic Advisors. Now he's the major economic advisor for Biden. That does not bid well for us. I can tell you that right now.
Right.
And I want to get into my personal relationships in terms of my fights with him when he was president of Harvard and came in and met with every chairman of the department other than Afro-American Studies. And Brother Skip Gates will tell you that, because he was saying for too long, black folk were the public face of Harvard. Those days are over now. And then he brings me in and trashes me for my album. And I told him, I looked him straight in the eyes, just like Malcolm would look Johnny Carson straight in the eyes and said, I am the man you think you are. I'm as much part of Harvard as you are. I will work with anybody I want to work with.
That's what we
okay. And with that, I got to jump out. Dr. West, it has been an honor and a privilege. My brothers are going to handle the rest of this. But thank you so very much. And
I salute you. Salute you. You just stay strong and fortified, my brother. And God bless your loved ones, man.
Thank you so much.
Peace, Jason. We'll catch you Thursday.
See you Thursday, Jason.
Dr. West.
Go ahead, Mondale.
Said something earlier, Dr. West, about royalty being Malcolm X, and it is his birthday. It is Malcolm X Day. So I think it's important that we talk about that royalty, and maybe even higher than royalty and close to deity when we think about this brother, because this is somebody who loved truth so much so that he cut short his fatherly moments, aborted, so to say. Tell our viewers why Ozzy Davis said that Malcolm was our prince.
Yeah. Well, you remember Ozzy said that in the temple there, the Pentecostal temple in Harlem, because no other church in all of New York would embrace the funeral of our dear brother Malcolm X. That's how cowardly our black ministers were in those days. Now, granted, Brother Malcolm only had about 5-6% approval in the black community when he was shot down like a dog in Harlem.
Ain't that something?
Audubon wrote 6%. So it's not as if we should ever think that because you love black people so deeply that they're going to love you back. You love black people because they're worthy of being loved. You love the truth and justice because truth and justice is bigger than all of us, and that's what your calling is. As long as you are true to your calling, and in Malcolm's case, true to Allah, and me as a Christian, true to God. That's what it's all about. You got to be open. You got to learn. But in the end, you're not looking for the world's popularity. You're looking for your own integrity in the way you work and witness in your life, and then use your death as a form of weaponry for your people, for your struggle, for your movement. That's Malcolm. That's Malcolm. We have never had such a figure. And it's very interesting to have a figure at that level who was a Muslim. And there is no Malcolm without the Honorable Elijah Muhammad.
Hey, Doctor.
There's no Malcolm without Marcus Garvey, the black nationalist tradition. That's why Hakeem Ahad-Bute and Baraka and Karenga and Sonia Sanchez, all of those are sons and daughters of Malcolm. James Cone, the founder of Liberation Theology, a son of Malcolm. Absolutely. So he has fruit that continues to flower and flourish. 39 years gone, and still his afterlife at work in our lives.
He's still here.
Hey, Dr. West, I got another question for you. It seems like, and I'll preference it with, it seems like every neoliberal and most conservatives are all democratic socialists while they're in the foxhole of COVID-19. What's amazing is do you think, well, my question is, do you think the amount of support that Americans are getting right now, especially Black Americans are getting right now during COVID-19 is suffice? And also the amount of deaths that are happening in our community, when America gets a cold, Black community gets a flu. Would you share your thoughts on what's going on with us when it comes down to COVID-19?
I think what we see is that you were so very right, though, brother, that when other folk are in deep crisis and trouble, here comes socialism in terms of government support. We saw that with Wall Street. They ended up with over $20 million. Not Main Street, not homeowners, but Wall Street. Now this virus hits, and they've got stimulus bills. We've been calling for stimulus bills. We've been calling for a Marshall Plan going all the way back to Brother Jesse Jackson in 84 and 88, right? Well, really even further than that with A. Philip Randolph and Martin King. So that when it comes to government intervention and support, be it Wall Street or be it the middle classes, disproportionately vanilla, all of a sudden, that's a positive thing. Socialism at work for the rich, for the well-to-do, for the middle classes. But when it comes to poor people, working people, when it comes especially to black, poor and working people, contempt, indifference, callousness, you're on your own. Pull yourself up by your own bootstrap. All the different rationalizations of greed and callousness coming from those above. And it comes in two forms, because again, it's not just the right wing. We get it among the neoliberal crowd too. You look at how Pelosi and company have behaved in terms of this stimulus bill. So much of that stimulus bill still went to the well-to-do. And they said, well, we tried to get some concessions, not in the way that you wanted. That's why the Progressive Caucus had to pull back. I was just with, I think I told you, I was just with Rashida just last night, the night before last, a deep conversation of the brothers and sisters talking about the medical apartheid, the food apartheid, the social apartheid, the job apartheid at work in Detroit, and yet inside of the city with one person owning so many. I mean, we only keep track of all of the building sites that one person owns, has an intimate relation with the mayor. And you say, wait, this is just a ruling class making profits in this chocolate city going under in terms of the masses of black folks. That's exactly what Rashida was pointing out. Sister Rashida was pointing out, God bless her. That's why I was supporting her with a fundraiser. But those are the kinds of issues that we have to not just highlight, but we got to intervene and fight on every level. Now, granted, I know you all talk about the whole context as well as the electoral political context. Whereas for me, you see the electoral political context, you go in and out because you got to be in the streets. You got to hit the jail. You got to be willing to take the bullets. And that's what's so important. I was blessed to just write an introduction for Imam Jamil Abdullah Al-Hamin, the H. Brown, who was one of our great freedom fighters. I was honored to write the introduction to his latest book. He's down in Arizona right now, struggling with dignity. He's my Muslim brother. He's a freedom fighter. Mumi Abdul Jamal would be another. So many of them who gave so much, easily forgotten black brothers, giving their all, and yet still standing tall, even in a cell. You see, it doesn't get deeper than that in terms of courage and love,
Indeed. Dr. West, we're going to take some questions from our followers. But while we're doing that, I just want to take this time to let you tell our members or our followers where they can find you at on social media, how they can follow you, and also just to remind you that I love you, brother.
Oh, I'm loving you right back, though, brother. And I'm praying for you. I'm pulling for you. And I just want you to know, as well as the others, especially for you and Marcus, and I say the same thing, Brother Jason, that never underestimate the impact that you are having when you are willing to shed your heart, mind, and soul in the name of truth and justice. Because what white supremacy wants to convince us is to think we make no difference whatsoever. I mean, I just finished this challenging book, my dear brother Frank Wilderson, on Afro-pessimism. And you say, well, okay, Afro-pessimism must always remind us just how vicious and ugly treatment of black people has been and continues to be. Absolutely. But if there's no fundamental common denominator of fortifying yourself to fight, then you remain a spectator and you end up getting incorporated so easy. Because when you're a spectator, people can pick you off. You don't have nothing to risk. You're not taking a chance on nothing. You're not investing yourself on nothing other than yourself.
Indeed.
And so that's what I love about you, brothers. You all are out here bearing witness, spreading the word in form of conversation. And you can disagree. I think that's beautiful. Y'all disagree. That's fine.
Yeah, we disagree a lot.
That's exactly. Exactly. Good God Almighty. You know that Johnny Hodges didn't always agree with Duke, and Count didn't always agree with Lester Young.
It was impossible unless somebody was lying. You know what I mean? So
That's right.
we have one of our listeners, Patty Serrano, wants to know, what's your call to action for Black people?
Well, I don't think there's one action, though. I appreciate that question. I don't think there's one action. I think the action is you got to love yourself, defend yourself, respect yourself, and be organized in some way. I don't think there's one action for all of Black people. That if you're a Muslim, then make sure that your mosque is involved in struggle for justice, tied to housing, tied to food provisions, tied to prison system, and so forth. If you're a Christian in your church, same thing. If you're an agnostic or an atheist like James Baldwin or Audre Lorde, then be in your own civic organization. If you're a young person, be involved, connected with your own generation, and do it in such a way that older brothers like me don't in any way are not viewed in any way as dictating who you ought to be, because you're dealing with circumstances older brothers like me don't know about.
Yes.
But we have to be both awake, we got to be fortified, and then people have to make their own decisions as to what their particular call to action is relative to their gifts and relative to their calling. Some of them going to be poets. You got to be poets who love the people. Some of them going to be doctors. You need to have doctors who love the people. Right down the line.
Hey, Dr. West, I want to give one call to action, and that is like and share this post. Like and share Clickbaity. Follow Mondale and myself on Twitter and Instagram. Share this post. Share this live stream. We're getting educated on a very urethral level right now, and you're one of the only people who can bring the prophetic fire, as you always do. We have another question from Ruth Leonard. Ruth says, Dr. West, how do we dismantle and rebuild the education system?
Rebuild the what, over?
The education system.
Oh, well, I want to salute Sister Ruth, because my hunch is she knows the answer to her question. She knows that there's a number of folk out there trying to do it. But one is that we've got to make sure that we love our kids enough to fight for them. And what I mean by that is, first, on a personal level, we've got to make sure we're educating them at home. See, mom and dad educated us independent of the school. Sunday school and vacation Bible school educated us independent of the home and the school. And then we got a whole lot of education in the schools on the block and in the nightclub that we won't go into right now. But you got to have a full-fledged education. But then when it comes to institutions, when it comes to structures, we've got to support those public schools that are trying to the best of their ability to make sure they have teachers who care, and the teachers who care are receiving the right kinds of resources, not just in the form of salary, but in the form of resources to manifest through technology for the students, manifest through different kinds of experiences for the students. Now, I'm highly suspicious of privatized education, but I know there might, in fact, be some instances where something like this can take place. I've been to a number of Afrocentric schools that are doing some wonderful jobs. And, of course, I've been to Brother Haki Mahabute's historic and legendary school doing a wonderful job. And they become models because they care, because they love, because they follow through, they execute the kind of educational embrace of young people. Our young folk are not going to be crazy about education if they don't feel that education loves them.
Wow. That's powerful, brother. And it's absolutely correct. I think it's a great flow into Anthony Rogers' right question, even though it's not about education, it's about who and how we get involved in certain situations, like the education system. Anthony's question is about environmental. Anthony Rogers Wright is one of the great Black environmentalists, a young brother who is, living on the front line as it pertains to what needs to happen to include Black voices in that movement. Absolutely. So his question to you, Dr. West, is what needs to happen for Black folk to see themselves centered in the Green New Deal? And do you believe that the term itself, Green New Deal he's talking about, is problematic and may detract from necessary language to mobilize Black people?
I think the crucial thing is that we continually tell our dear comrades like Sister AOC coming out of New York in Congress that the white supremacist dimension of every policy must be examined, and that the anti-racist and anti-white supremacist elements must be emphasized so that people can begin to understand. I think Sister ANC and a number of others do. People can begin to understand, what Benjamin Chavis many decades ago called environmental racism, and why it is that the pollution, and why it is that the lead poisoning, why it is that other forms of environmental and ecological contamination so often reside in the communities of the weak and vulnerable, especially the hoods, especially the barrios, especially the reservations. But I think the young activist, the young comrade who raised that crucial question, again, I think he can answer it so much better than I can, because he's on the ground, and I know he's doing a wonderful job. And I think he has to be center stage in talking about this in a way that I ought not to be center stage, because he knows so much more about it.
Hey, thank you, Dr. West. This is a personal question, then we'll get back to some of our comments questions. So Michael Jordan said, Republicans buy sneakers too. Meanwhile, LeBron has a school that has almost 100%, I believe, graduation rate from his high school. So I'm going to ask you sort of just a theory question. Greatest of all time, and you can add on any player from the 70s, 60s, any era that you care. What's your favorite? Who you think the greatest is of all time when it comes down to athletes? And you could add the social or basketball skills to the same question.
Oh no, the greatest athlete of the 20th century was Muhammad Ali.
All right now.
Ain't no doubt about that. And he, alongside Richard Pryor, was the freest black man of the 20th century. Didn't care what people thought, spoke from his heart, spoke from his soul. Didn't have to go to college, but the college went through him.
Wow.
That's Muhammad Ali. That's courage. Took the gold, took the championship belt and said, take it. That's like, take your Nobel Prize, take your Pulitzer Prize, take all your titles. They don't mean nothing to me compared to the love that I have for my people. Well, you see, that's a freedom. Now that didn't make him a champion, because he had to master the craft and technique and make sure that James Foreman didn't knock him into next week,
That's right.
But that kind of courage, that kind of dignity, that kind of freedom. And I'm blessed to have his grandson in my class, Brother Jacob. He's taken 3 classes from me here at Harvard. Oh yeah, I'm an advisor on his thesis. He's a brilliant brother out of Philadelphia with his precious mother and father. That Brother Jacob, he's also a grand athlete. He's been a bit injured, but he's a grand athlete, but he's a brilliant brother. And we talk about his grandfather all the time. I met his grandfather. I introduced his grandfather on one occasion down in Atlanta, Muhammad Ali. But when it comes to just sheer greatness of athletic excellence and spiritual excellence, as much as I love Willie Mays, he was my hero when I was growing up, it is Muhammad Ali across the board. Believe me, that's like the Sarah Vaughan, when it comes to just the greatest artistic vocalist of the 20th century, Sarah Vaughan, Muhammad Ali.
That's powerful. Marcus, you want to get to Gilbert's question?
Yeah, so I'm gonna Gilbert Cruz, and by the way, Dr. West, a lot of the folks who are watching are our friends, and some of them have just picked up on the show. But I will give you a shout out, because a lot of the folks that we mutually know supported Bernie and supported my campaign. So I just wanted to publicly say thank you.
Oh, right on, indeed.
I appreciate that.
Beautiful.
And Brother Gilbert was one of them. Gilbert Cruz says, to piggyback off of Patty Seriano's question, for people who are only involved politically, meaning they only vote, can you explain what people might have to be willing to do to start in terms of organizing outside of electoral politics in the context of the very possible reality that Trump is reelected?
Well, in a certain sense, it's going to push a lot of folk to get organized, because if neo-fascists take over again, there's going to be some intense battles, and some of it will spill over in the street and will come to your house. Because, I mean, it's interesting that a lot of folk, they don't really become activists until a catastrophe comes to their house. And when it comes to their house, and all of a sudden they get militant overnight, and we say, oh, that's beautiful, but we've been out here for a long, long time. We had to wait till it came to your house before you were affected. But when you're going to have, this massive kind of unemployment and underemployment, that will be so much more than what we're used to. As the attacks, the ugly xenophobic attacks increase, as the cutbacks take place on the job, healthcare, and in the schools, we're going to be forced to fight back. So you have to be part of some form of fight back. And it depends on where you're from, what city. Each city has its own different organizations. Each neighborhood has its own different organizations. You got to join those organizations. Talk to some folk on the block, in the barbershop, in the beauty salon, in any of the structures in your community, as to how you can become active and involved in the fight back against the greed and the hatred that is escalating in our country.
Indeed. Dr. West, we're gonna give you the rest of your evening back. We're gonna round up. Marcus, before I let you close, I just want to say to Dr. West that I want to lift up a sentiment that I left never forget with, and that's about Black love and how we show it to ourselves without or with rejection of what white people say is acceptable. And you shout out on that album the creativity, the linguistic creativity of Black people. So I want to let you know, much like a lot of people feel, you my nigga.
I love it. I love it, brother. I love it. I'm loving you right back too, my brother. I tell you that. There ain't no doubt about it, man.
Hey,
No, that we inspire one another, and is nothing like it. And the beautiful thing about it is that when you have that kind of love, and joy is always one of the fruits of love, and you have this kind of joy, you have a joy that no white supremacy can ever take away.
Indeed, brother.
Because you got a memory of it, you got an example of it, you got an enactment and an embodiment of it. Can't nobody ever, ever, ever take it away. In a jail, in the grave, on the street, it's always there. Somebody can take it and run. Somebody can take it. I remember when I had the dialogue with Snoop Dogg. Well, I brought him to one of my lectures in Houston. And I said, Lord, we got a genius in the house, y'all. And it was one of these real upper middle class gatherings. So I was glad to see him show up with his partners. And I had him come up on stage, and he said, Brother West, man, I sure appreciate what you had to say. I'm going to take your truths, man. I'm going to take it and run. I'm going to take it and run, man. I'm going to take it here. I'm going to take it there. And I said, you got to make it your own now, because, Snoop ain't just going to become somebody else overnight. I don't want him to do that. You be yourself. Remember your mother playing the dramatics and so forth and so on, but take it and run. That's what we do to each other. We empower each other, and we take it and run. And we try to make it our own. And sometimes when we fail, that's all right. Try again, fail better. That's all right. We got bounce back. Every setback is a set up for a comeback and a bounce back. And we got to have bounce back today.
Hey, Dr. West, before I close up and say what I got to say, I did, Brother Julian Mack just entered a very, very good question that I think if you could answer very briefly.
Sure.
Dr. West, can you speak to the progressive gap we see with the boomer gatekeepers? What can we do to get the older generation to be more progressive?
No, you got to push them out of the way. You tell them we love you, you're slowing down, you're tired, weary, and got too much fatigue. Don't think that you got the energy and enthusiasm of the truths you had in your 20s when it's clear you're running out of gas. So you got to push them out of the way lovingly. What does it mean by push them out of the way? Of course, you still have a relation. Of course, you still have an affiliation, but critically filter what they have to say and be bold in the truths that you have to speak. You see what I mean?
Yes,
you have to be bold in those truths, you see. You see, when Miles Davis started blowing a different kind of notes than Louis Armstrong, they still asking, Miles, what is jazz? Jazz is Louis Armstrong and Charlie Parker, but I'm not playing Louis Armstrong no more. I'm boldly asserting myself as who I am based on Louis Armstrong. So don't mess with Louis. Don't mess with Louis. We got to have the young folks. We got to be able to protect the elders, but the elders are running out of gas and they're tied to old paradigms. Exploit those paradigms. That's what Dizzy Gillespie and them did. That's what Mary Lou Williams did. That's what Ella did. That's what Billy did. We learn it from our tradition.
Yes, sir. So I'm going to close this out, but before I let you just say one more thing, I have to say one thing about Dr. West, everyone. First, like in the tradition of so many folks, we got to give folks flowers while they're here. And Dr. West is one of the only human beings who has hardly ever told me the words, no, I can't do it. One of the busiest men that I know, and has hardly ever told me no. And I want to give a brief story while you're on the phone with me, Dr. West. You took me to the Billion Man March a couple years ago. And instead of getting dropped off at backstage, you wanted us to walk through the whole damn crowd. Now, understand something, America. Dr. West is a well-known black man walking through a crowd of black men, millions of black men, right? And he stopped and took a picture and hugged. You can't do that now, Dr. West, but you stopped and took a picture and hugged every single person. And when we got to the front of the stage, they gave us a seat right in front of the Honorable Louis Farrakhan. They gave us a seat. You remember that?
Oh, no, absolutely. Absolutely.
And the most important thing that I remember about that was Snoop Dogg was up there. Puffy was up there. David Chappelle was up there. Russell Simmons was up there. And all of them literally gave you reference, came up to you and hugged you and basically looked at me and Roy Tatum like, who are these Negroes with this dude? But even with that, I just want to tell you that like experiences like that impacted my life personally. Just thank you for being the person that you are, giving it to us the way that you do. So here's your flowers. I love you too, brother. And I mean that from the bottom of my heart.
Brother, I love you. And you know, the beautiful thing is you do exactly the same thing for the younger brothers today. And that brings joy to my soul. You see what I mean? So that we keeping that tradition alive. You see what I'm saying? So I love you, brother. I'm praying for all of your loved ones to be strong and safe. And that's true for each and every one of the persons who are listening. And that's definitely true for our dear brother Mondale as well. But thank you all. And anytime you call, just let me know. We'll do it again.
All right. Thank you, Dr. West. And to everyone watching, this is Clickbaity, the political thirst trap.
Trap squad, 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 trap squad. Hey, clickbaity political. Yeah, thirst trap, trap squad, squirrel squad. Our mission is critical to speak the truth to the masses. Yeah. We here for the fight. We ain't started, but we here to finish it. Sick and tired of seeing the privilege. Take advantage of the weak and the innocent. So we let our voice be heard. Every single weeknight. Unapologetic. Yeah. Black people, despite this white supremacist system that we live through on a daily, we still throwing up those acorns cause we represent clickbaity. Yeah. Trap squad, trap squad, trap squad. Let me hear ya. Trap squad, trap squad. Throw those squirrels up if you with it. Trap squad, trap squad. Yeah, I see you, yeah, I see you. Trap squad.